Well, we're headed on off to the Miller Brewery tour in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And you're going to go with us. Check out some of the videos, check out some of the pictures. It was a pretty good time. Lots of eye candy, lots of things to see before you actually go. There is, of course, like every other place, there's a gift shop. You can sample some beer and other beverages before you go. And make sure you lock up everything. Don't bring in anything crazy that you're not supposed to have on you.
The Miller legend begins at this castle in Germany, where the young brewmaster to the royal court had resolved to take his talents and special beer to the New World. It was 1854 when Frederick J. Miller set sail for America, bound for a future that even he could not have imagined. He brought with him his skill, his ambition, and in his pocket, his own special strain of yeast. A centuries-old secret that remains carefully guarded to this day, having been handed down from generation to generation. After a full year of searching his vast new country for the perfect location, Fred Miller found exactly what he was looking for right here in Milwaukee. Fine hops and barley, skilled craftsmen, and an abundance of pure, fresh water. He also found plenty of thirsty customers. So in 1855, Frederick Miller bought the Plank Road Brewery, complete with its underground caves, in what would become Miller Valley. During his first year in business, he produced 300 barrels of his great beer. But it was more than just outstanding beer that set Frederick Miller apart from his peers. It was also his popular beer garden, the place where Miller Time was born. In those days, Milwaukee wasn't the only Midwestern town where beer was brewed, but it suddenly became a much more important brewing center in 1871, following the Great Chicago Fire. Milwaukee rose to the occasion, sending relief, comfort, and beer to help Chicago through its disaster. By the 1880s, Frederick's growing brewery was rolling out nearly 80,000 barrels a year. Business was booming, and in 1886, Miller opened a brand new brew house, the same historic brew house you'll be walking past today here in Miller Valley. His place in brewing history was secure, his legacy profound, and in 1888, Frederick J. Miller passed away at the age of 63. Upon his famous father's death, Ernest Miller took the brewery helm, and remarkable progress continued. In 1903, even before Henry Ford had one for cars, Miller launched its own assembly line for bottles right here in Miller Valley. That same year, the company's premium beer became known as Miller High Life. By 1918, production had reached 500,000 barrels, but the next year, progress came to a sudden stop with the advent of Prohibition. Most beer companies just disappeared, but the Miller family continued to innovate, introducing non-alcoholic beverages like lemon soda and malt syrup. And sure enough, when Prohibition was repealed in 1933, Miller quickly became more a part of the American scene than ever before. By the mid-20th century, the brewery was experiencing tremendous growth, fueled by the vision of our founder's grandson, Frederick C. Miller, the first company president to embrace the potential of a brand new advertising medium, television. The brand continued to grow, and in 1969, Miller was sold to Philip Morris. Soon, Miller created what is today the industry's biggest category, low-calorie beer. The year was 1973. The brand was Miller Lite, the most popular new beer of all time. Miller Lite proved to Americans that they didn't have to sacrifice taste for fewer calories. It also brought a healthy dose of fun to the industry. Today, Miller Lite remains what it's always been, one of the best tasting and biggest selling light beers in America. Our brewery is a vital part of Milwaukee and has been for more than a century and a half. We are proud of our community and determined to keep our founders' commitment alive. They say Frederick Miller's desire was to be more than a great brewer, leader, and innovator. They say what he really wanted was to make the whole world feel like his personal guest.
Make sure you wear comfortable clothes and footwear because you're going to be doing some walking. You're going to be going up and down a couple flights of steps. You're not going to have a whole lot of time to sit down. Just make sure that you stay on the sidewalk, stay away from the road, don't get run over, listen to your tour guide. Lots of cool things to hear, lots of cool things to take pictures of.
Until the 90s, my employees suggested that they So that's when Frederick came here in 1855. He purchased the skeleton of the brewery from the Best Brothers that had sold it to the bank actually for $2,370. Frederick paid the equivalent of $60,000 for the brewery that he got. Now, that would have included at that time the Watertown Plank Road Brewery, the caves down right here, as well as a whiskey distillery. And as you can imagine, whiskey didn't end up doing all that well in Milwaukee. Now, they would have dug these out in 1849. They went back another 600 feet past the mural in the background there. They stretched into 9 other caverns that once went 100 feet underneath the earth, and almost all of which have caved in by now due to time and neglect. And the ones that haven't caved in, we've already talked about. That's how beer gets pumped from one building to another. Now, they would have used these caves for refrigeration, but there was no such thing as the American way. There was only the old German traditions that they had brought across. So they would have wrapped, packed, and stacked the barrels, much like what you're seeing right over there under that archway. And if you look up by that exit sign, you will see a brown square right next to it. That actually used to be a ramp where they would ramp in ice and snow from the local lakes and rivers to wrap, pack, and stack in the barrels. Finally, if you're looking at these tools over here, no, not you guys, the tools on the walls right here, yeah. These right here are the Cooper tools, men and women's tools who would have spent all day and all night making sawdust. Well, barrels, of course, but sawdust was actually equally as important. They would take the ice and the snow, they would rack, pack, and stack it into the barrels, then sprinkle the sawdust on top to cement it into the wall. And that was actually how they refrigerated. Would have lasted all the way through a hot spring and summer, well into autumn, and maybe a little bit into winter if you played your cards right. And 15,000 barrels at its max capacity, this was quite useful as a refrigerator until an actual refrigerator was built up top in about 1890. It starts to rear its head, mechanical refrigeration. And with that being erected, Frederick decided that the caves down here were no longer relevant, obsolete even, so he abandons them. Let's be clear, he leaves the caves. He does not make any structural integrity, nothing. He just leaves. And it wouldn't be until many, many years later that one of his lineage would rediscover the caves. That being said, something very important in American history went down. My friends, what happened in the year 1919? Prohibition, yeah, known as the Dark Ages of brewing. Now just imagine for a second, put yourself in someone else's shoes. Think about what would happen if on June 26th this year, if the government just shut down your entire industry. Anything even remotely resembling your industry also completely cut off. A lot of people instantly without their jobs. Very SOL, straight up thousands of breweries, across the country shut down. And lots of people would lose their jobs. People are smuggling beer and moonshine across state lines. They're running from the police. They're risking jail time. And meanwhile, we made soda. Look at this. We made root beer during that time. Isn't that fun? We made orange soda. How great. That helped keep us afloat. It wasn't the only thing, though. We also had malt tonic. Right here, it's my favorite thing Miller has ever made. It was the only time we have ever sold a medication. You could get it prescribed in 6 and 12 packs at 1.2% alcohol. And it was a cure for insomnia, and I'm sure it cured a little bit more than insomnia. We were not allowed to sell a drink federally with more than 1% alcohol. We sold one with 0.99% alcohol. We call that a near beer. People would buy our near beer. They would head down to the local drugstore. They would buy some rubbing alcohol.
Ooh.
Do you know where this is going? Yeah, by the way, you go blind after drinking ethanol for long periods of time. So again, people are risking life and limb. Now, Wisconsin as a state, never on board with prohibition. They were not down for it. So yeah, federally couldn't buy beer, couldn't sell beer, hell, you couldn't even give it away. But in Wisconsin, they fought for the right for you to brew it on your own property. So people were able to go up north to the black market in Wisconsin. They bought some hops, they bought some brewer's yeast. They would come back down, buy our malt syrup, and they would make their own bathtub beer. Probably wasn't very good. Definitely wasn't very good. But again, desperate times and desperate measures. Now, if we know what happens in 1919, what happens in 1933? Yep, it's repealed. Excellent. We are allowed to go back to being a brewery, and we do. It would also mean that Frederick C. Miller was about to take over his grandsire's company. When he does, he wants to expand everything he can, and he expands right through the ceiling somewhere when he tries to build an elevator shaft for the fermentation building that you guys saw up on top. He caved through the top of the ceiling, rediscovered the caves that were down here. Oh, we had a lot had already caved in by then. And he had restructured the top of the cave. He wanted to make sure it was solidified and sound at 18 feet up, 15 feet across, and 62 feet underground. He thought this would be a great place for some catering, for some tours, for some rock concerts, yeah. Eventually, I'm not kidding, we would do rock concerts in here. He wanted to do all sorts of fun things in here, and in the modern day we started to do, in the 70s actually, we had like fashion shows and beauty pageants. There was actually a runway that went down the entirety of the cave. That was pretty cool. We had, what else? One of the brewers got married here. Scooter Jeanette had his wedding to his wife right here on this stage, and then he had his reception up at the Miller Inn. We have had, what else? Beer yoga. Right before COVID, people would come down here and stretch and then go get hydrated up at the Miller Inn. We've also had television shows. Do you guys know the show Top Chef? They did a beer battered episode. They used High Life as a part of their kits and came down here to judge the food. And then the Real Housewives of Salt Lake City. Okay. Well, it was a bunch of ex-Mormon women drinking in our cave. You really didn't miss much, I promise you. Anyway, there is an old band I'd like to introduce you to at the top of the stairs. Please come join me and meet my friend. the patron saint of beer, but if you ask a German, he's a lot like the Johnny Appleseed of Germany. The first person to ever put hops into brewing is King Gambrinus, at least as the legend goes. They say he once drank 225 steins above the table, drinking everybody else well under it, earning him the title. But my personal favorite story of him is that way back in the day, in the old days of Germany, there was an old courtyard, there was an old barrel. The goal of this race was to get that barrel from one end of the courtyard to the other, but you weren't allowed to roll the barrel. Now listen, many of the men were genuinely strong enough to lift the barrel. Nobody is strong enough to lift and walk at the same time. What King Gambrinus did was described as a miracle. As he approaches the barrel with all of his holiness, he picks it up, he drinks down half of it, he slams it on his back, and then he marches his way across the field just like that. When he gets there, they're furious. They're like, 9 Dukov, not supposed to be made it across, and this is what he does.
Different container, made it across all right.
That's what earned him the patronage. What we like to say is if you raise your love to him, he will raise it in kind, and your mouth shall always stay full. There you go, such a cute. Excellent, guys. We are going into the Miller Inn now. Restrooms on the next spot on the tour, as well as another beer for you. Please recycle your cups at the top of the stairs.
Our world-class brewers carefully mix, monitor, and test these ingredients as they go from mash tun to lauter tun to brew kettle. Frederick Miller's famous yeast is carefully added before fermentation. Then, after aging and filtering, the beer is ready to be packaged. About 60% of it goes into cans, 30% into bottles, and about 10% into kegs. The packaging process begins with fresh, new, shrink-wrapped bottles and cans, each one thoroughly rinsed in warm water to meet our high standards. After rinsing, it's off to the fillers. This amazing machine can fill 1,200 bottles a minute. In slow motion, you can see the empty bottles being spun into position, carefully filled, and finally crowned, with each precision task being measured in split seconds. As fast as our bottles are filled, our cans are filled even faster, in large part because we don't have to worry about breaking glass. This machine can fill up to 2,000 cans per minute. That's a case and a half of beer every second. In real time, it's almost impossible to see what's happening. But when we drop down to slow motion, you'll see the empty aluminum cans have been filled with fresh beer, sealed with high-tech lids, and are being sent on their way to the pasteurizer. The pasteurization process is important because it gives our beer an extended shelf life, enabling us to store it unrefrigerated for up to 52 weeks depending on brand, without any change in flavor or aroma. That's where our special freshness date comes in. A high-speed laser printer shoots a freshness date onto the bottom of every can, the neck of every bottle, and the side of every case. This code tells distributors and retailers when to pull the beer off the shelf to make sure our consumers always get the freshest beer. We use a 7-character code. The first 3 letters are the month, the next 2 the date, and the last 2 the year. Miller Brewing Company invented freshness coding for beer and was the first brewer to put a freshness date on all of its products, including a 9-week code on its keg beer. And speaking of kegs, ours are filled across the street in North Packaging on a machine called the Keg-O-Matic. It fills 12 kegs at once, up to 12,000 per day. Keg beer is true draft beer, so it is not heat pasteurized, but instead stored in coolers at 34 degrees to keep it fresh. Molson Coors is also proud to be the only American brewer to offer true draft beer in cans and bottles. To produce Miller Genuine Draft and Miller 64, we use a special process called cold ceramic filtration. This process removes all impurities and results in great tasting packaged draft beer that does not need pasteurization, and that has the same shelf life as our other beers. Now it's time to label our bottles, so you know what you're drinking. These machines can apply neck and body labels to some 1,400 bottles per minute. Numerous quality inspections are performed throughout the entire brewing and packaging process. Along all of our packaging lines, laser scanners constantly check for imperfections. If any are found, the products in question are bumped off the line and sent to be recycled or repackaged. Now that the bottles and cans are all filled, sealed, gig-coated, and labeled, it's time to put them in boxes, what we call secondary packaging. The last step in the packaging process occurs here at one of our 11 computerized palletizers. Here, our packages are stacked onto pallets in layers of alternating patterns for maximum stability. All pallets are stretch wrapped before being loaded onto trucks and sent off to serve our thirsty customers. It's not just great beer that distinguishes our historic Milwaukee brewery. It's also the way we run our business. We have a long history of environmental stewardship, and today, our commitment is stronger than ever as we move towards zero waste operations. We've invested in paper and cardboard balers, as well as a can densifier, to improve the quality of our recycled byproducts and to reduce our overall landfill contribution.
And there's a couple words of wisdom. One, I'm going to quote Benjamin Franklin. He said, "Beer is proof that God loves us and wants us to be happy." And he said, "In beer and in wine there is happiness. In water there is bacteria."